Part 1. The Bold. France in the 1300s was one of the most powerful states in medieval Europe. It had more people and more wealth than any other European kingdom, with around 16 million people. French kings shaped Europe's culture, religion, and politics, and French art and language spread widely. Yet, the kings themselves were weak. They did not own all the land directly, relying on vassals and appanages, parcels of land given out by the king to be governed by his relatives. The richest part of France was the county of Flanders in the north. Cities like Ghent, Bruges, Lille, and Ypres made it a busy economic center, famous for its cloth and textiles. But wealth caused tension between rich French-speaking elites and local Flemish workers. In 1302, anger over high taxes led to the Matins of Bruges, when locals killed French soldiers. Soon after, Flemish militias beat the French at the Battle of the Golden Spurs, winning local independence. War soon threatened Flanders. In 1337, England's King Edward III claimed the French throne, starting the Hundred-Year War. Flanders' economy relied on English wool, so it suffered when Edward III stopped the wool trade to hurt French authority. One Ghent merchant, Jacob van Artevelde, took control of the city and sided with England for a time before his rebellion was put down. France went on to lose the Battle of Crécy in 1346, before the Black Death swept through the kingdom in the years after. King John II became king in 1350, but was captured at Poitiers in 1356 and held for a huge ransom. John II was not the only French royalty captured at the Battle of Poitiers. His youngest son Philip was too. Philip fought bravely with his father and earned the nickname the Bold. While the king was away, France faced violent peasant revolts and failed English attacks. In 1360, the Treaty of Brittany ended this crisis. John II's ransom was set at an enormous 3 million gold crowns. After paying part of it, he returned home and gave Philip the small Duchy of Touraine in western France. In 1361, the last Capetian Duke of Burgundy died without an heir. John initially wanted the land for himself, but the interests of the Burgundian locals, coupled with his generous feelings toward his youngest son, made this impossible. In 1363, he made Philip the first Valois Duke of Burgundy, one of France's most powerful vassals. Touraine was surrendered back to the crown. John then tried to find Philip a strong bride to secure Burgundy. The last Capetian Duke was already promised to the 12-year-old Margaret of Flanders, to a collection of lands straddling France and the Holy Roman Empire: Flanders, the Free County of Burgundy, Artois, Nevers, and Rethel. Edward III wanted his son Edmund to marry her, but Pope Urban V, a proud Frenchman, blocked the arrangement. John died in 1364, and Philip's brother, King Charles V, saw to it that his brother would be married. Philip and Margaret married in Ghent on June 19, 1369, securing his position and influence in France. Ruling such large, rich, and divided lands was hard. Flanders had busy cities full of merchants and weavers who wanted better pay and better conditions. During the 1370s, the economy slowed and tensions grew. In 1379, Bruges started digging a canal to siphon trade and income away from Ghent. The people of Ghent destroyed the canal in anger, killed an official, and burned a castle. Many in Flanders joined Ghent's revolt. Philip van Artevelde, the son of Jacob, led Ghent's rebels. On May 3, 1382, they surprised Bruges during a festival and defeated Count Louis II's drunken army at Beverhoutsveld. Louis II fled and asked his son-in-law Philip for help. Philip convinced his nephew, the new King of France, Charles VI, to send 10,000 soldiers. In November, near Roosebeke, the French crushed Ghent's army. Artevelde died, and thousands of Flemings were killed. Soon after, England invaded. During the Western Schism, France and Flanders followed the Pope in Avignon, while England backed the Pope in Rome. Bishop Henry Despenser led a crusade, aiming to flip Flanders and reopen the wool trade. His army captured towns like Dunkirk, but failed miserably in trying to besiege Ypres. Disease and hunger forced him to retreat in disgrace. When Count Louis II died in 1384, Philip became Count of Flanders alongside his wife. Ghent still resisted, so Philip and Charles VI attacked their ally Damme in 1385. After heavy fighting, Ghent agreed to peace at Tournai in December. Philip forgave the city, restored its rights, and Ghent broke its alliance with England. Philip's long struggle to rule the region was at an end, and his reign as Count of Flanders could now truly begin. With peace brought to Flanders, Philip looked to secure his family's future, so he looked for strong marriage partners in the Low Countries. Albert of Bavaria ruled Hainaut, Holland and Zeeland, north of Flanders, and his daughter Margaret presented Philip with a strong match. Philip's son John, aged 13, agreed to marry her. Philip's daughter Margaret agreed to marry Albert's son William in exchange. As a bonus, Joanna, the elderly Duchess of Brabant and Limburg, promised her lands to Burgundy when she'd die, which increased Philip's power even more. The double wedding in 1385 brought Burgundy, Brabant, Hainaut, Holland, and Zeeland together. Rulers from across Europe attended the event in Cambrai, which showed Burgundy's rising wealth. Philip then arranged more marriages. His daughter Catherine married into the Habsburgs, which gave him influence in Alsace. Mary married the heir of Savoy, which calmed Burgundy's eastern border. His son Anthony married into the House of Luxembourg, which strengthened Burgundy near the Rhine. Philip ruled many lands that sat far apart, so he split them into two groups for better governance. He set Dijon as the center of the south and Lille as the center of the north. Each group had its own local government, but followed his overall rule. A governing body in both cities, called the Chambers of Accounts, managed taxes, handled justice, and kept detailed records while Philip was away. Still, some cities, particularly the four members of Flanders, Ghent, Bruges, Lille, and the Frank of Bruges, guarded their autonomy closely, so Philip had to cooperate with them to keep peace and order. Charles VI became King of France in 1380 at age 12, so his uncles, Philip, the Duke of Burgundy, Louis, the Duke of Anjou, and John, the Duke of Berry, ruled as his regents. Louis left in 1384 to claim Naples, leaving Philip to run the north of France, while Barry ran the south. They worked closely, and even arranged Charles VI's marriage to Isabel of Bavaria in 1385. In 1388, Charles took control from his uncles, guided by the influence of his younger brother Louis, the Duke of Orleans. In 1392, during a campaign against the Duke of Brittany, a loud clang startled Charles into a violent frenzy, causing him to attack his own men. He would never be the same again. Philip stepped in afterwards, locked up the king's advisors, and ruled with Barry and Queen Isabel's support. In 1391, a crusading spirit began to grip Europe. Philip planned one to be led by his son John. Their goal was to stop the Ottoman Turks, whose empire was pushing across the Balkans from Anatolia. King Sigismund of Hungary wanted Western help to stop them. John led his army to take Nicopolis on the Danube River, but the Crusaders focused more on luxury than discipline. On September 25th, 1396, they charged too early against Sultan Bayezid's men, and the Ottomans destroyed them. When John returned from captivity in 1398, crowds in Flanders celebrated him as a hero. Propaganda turned defeat into glory, and he became known as John the Fearless. In 1404, Philip fell ill with the flu while traveling in Brabant and died on April 27th at age 62. Through strategy, alliances, and ambition, Philip the Bold turned Burgundy from a collection of disconnected and unrelated lands into one of Europe's most powerful and organized states. Part 2. The Fearless. Though he lived under his father's authority, John learned politics, diplomacy, war, and administration across all the Burgundian lands. When Philip died, John was ready to step up as the new Duke of Burgundy. John and his brother Anthony settled payments and arranged who would inherit what. So by 1407, John held Flanders, Artois, and the two Burgundies. Anthony ruled Brabant and Limburg, and their brother Philip held Navarre and Rethel. John's early rule stayed calm, but his biggest challenge initially came from the four members of Flanders. When he inherited Flanders from his mother in 1405, the four members demanded that John should live in Flanders, respect local laws, and finish a trade deal with England. John agreed, though he shaped each answer to suit his needs. The four members often refused his calls for money and soldiers, but they did not unite against John, as their own quarrels weakened cooperation. John used this weakness against them, winning allies in Ghent and replacing leaders in Bruges. By 1407, all three major towns either supported him or kept quiet, securing John's rule in the rich region. When Philip died in 1404, French politics changed for the worse. Philip and his brother Barry had guided the kingdom for years, but once Philip was gone, Duke Louis of Orleans moved fast to gain control. Louis had already gained the reputation of being a womanizer and a warmonger, rumored to be in an affair with Queen Isabel, and known for openly challenging King Henry IV of England to a duel. Philip and Barry had blocked Louis before, but now nothing stopped him. Louis used his new power to arrange a grand marriage for his son, raise taxes for himself, and take high offices. As he gathered wealth, and supported the Avignon Pope, many people in Paris turned against him. John used his unrest to present himself as a champion of the people, decrying Louis's high taxes. This allowed John to enter Paris with armed followers in 1405. Louis fled with Queen Isabel to Milan and tried to take the young Dauphin, but John brought the heir back. Many French princes approved of this, and for a time, John looked secure. Regardless, tensions still rose. Louis's constant affairs offended John, and spies claimed Louis planned to kill him. John chose to strike first. On the cold night of November 23rd, 1407, Louis was riding through the narrow streets of Paris when masked attackers dragged him down from his mule, severed his left hand, and killed him before fleeing into the dark. John went to Louis's funeral and acted sad and shocked, and at first, many people believed him. Some people in Paris even cheered the assassination because they blamed Louis for heavy taxes. But once people connected the dots, John had no choice but to flee. Luckily, France did not unite against him, which allowed John to return in March 1408. He argued that Louis acted like a tyrant, and that killing a tyrant protected the people. King Charles accepted this idea and cleared John's charges. At the same time, trouble grew in Liege, a large bishopric in today's eastern Belgium. Its prince bishop, John of Bavaria, wanted to build a strong hereditary state. In 1406, rebels in Liege chose their own leader instead and took over most of the region. John of Bavaria asked John for help, and the Burgundians sent money and troops. The Burgundians marched into Liege in September 1408. On September 23rd, John met the rebels north of the city. The rebels fired cannon from their position near Tongres. John attacked from the front and ordered his cavalry to attack the rebels from their rear, securing a victory in over an hour. John of Bavaria returned to power, and from then on, Liege fell into the Burgundian sphere of influence. Charles, the young son of the slain Louis, waited for the right moment to act. His father-in-law, Count Bernard of Armagnac, helped him lead Louis's followers, including the Dukes of Berry and Bourbon. In 1410, these Armagnacs formed the League of Ghent and raised an army of 9,000. They claimed they wanted to free the king and the Dauphin Louis from Burgundian control. John saw this threat and gathered his own forces under his brother Anthony. Both sides built up armies around Paris, ultimately avoiding a major battle. Peace talks at Bicêtre that November did not help. Fortunately, John could rely on Paris, as many workers, guilds, city leaders, and nearby towns backed him, because he spoke against heavy taxes. In 1411, tensions finally boiled over. The Armagnacs seized towns near Artois and tried to surround Paris, but John brought in English help and struck first. His forces broke the siege at the capital and retook lost towns in the region. Despite English troops being present to help the Burgundians, King Henry IV signed the Treaty of Bourges with the Armagnacs in 1412, promising support. In response, John bombarded Bourges into submission. Peace finally came at Auxerre in August, ordering both sides to end their ties with England. However, the Dauphin Louis was growing stronger and more independent. In 1413, he restored old enemies of John to power, and even dismissed John's chancellor. That spring, the Capetian revolt shook Paris, where angry mobs demanded reforms. With the Dauphin rising in power and Charles recovering, John fled Paris in late August. John was shut out from Paris. His enemies now controlled the capital. John tried to win back support by saying that Dauphin Louis needed his help, but few believed him. In early 1414, the Armagnacs gathered a large army to crush the Burgundians. The Royal French army moved slowly, eventually reaching the town of Arras in Artois. John destroyed the suburbs, strengthened the garrison with the Burgundian and English troops, and used artillery to great effect. Illness spread in the royal camp and drained his strength. In September, the Armagnacs agreed to peace, letting John keep control of Arras. In 1415, King Henry V of England landed in Normandy, going on to slaughter much of the French and Armagnac nobility at Azincourt on October 25th. Very few Burgundians participated, though Anthony did, and was killed. Soon after, the Dauphin Louis died. His death reinvigorated the Armagnac leaders, who continued to shut John out of power. Late in the night of May 28, 1418, Burgundian soldiers entered Paris through a gate secretly opened by a Parisian sympathizer. They seized the king's household and hunted down Armagnac leaders. The new Dauphin, Charles, fled the city as Parisian mobs began hunting down and killing any Armagnac official they could get their hands on, including Count Bernard of Armagnac himself. John took control of Paris after the massacre, while the Dauphin Charles fled to Bourges. Yet, both sides still met in hopes of peace in 1419, as Henry V now threatened Paris. John and the Dauphin agreed to meet again on a bridge in Montereau on September 10th. Once the two parties stood in the middle, the gates were suddenly shut behind them, and John was slain. Part 3. The Good. John and Margaret of Bavaria's son, Philip, was 23 when he inherited his father's lands. He did not chase revenge for his father's murder, instead opting to keep the peace around Burgundy. When Henry V forced the Treaty of Troyes on France in 1420, making his descendants heirs to the French throne, Philip stayed out of it. Philip built strong ties through marriage. His sister Anne married John, the Duke of Bedford, who ruled northern France for the young King Henry VI. His sister Margaret married Arthur, the future Duke of Brittany. These marriages linked Burgundy in an alliance with England and Brittany against France. Philip focused on growing Burgundian power in the Low Countries. John III of Namur needed money and had no heir, so Philip offered a large payment to gain Namur in 1429, when John III died. A larger struggle began when Jacqueline, daughter of Count William VI and cousin of Philip, inherited Holland, Zeeland, and Hainaut. Her uncle, John of Bavaria, also wanted these lands. She married Humphrey, the Duke of Gloucester, in 1423, which drew English interests into the region. Jacqueline and Gloucester held part of Hainaut for a short time, but he soon abandoned the marriage. Jacqueline escaped to Holland. In 1426, Bedford sent aid to Jacqueline, but Philip stopped it at Beverhoutsveld. When Duke John IV of Brabant, Jacqueline's ex-husband, died in 1427, Philip gained more leverage over the isolated Jacqueline. In 1428, she accepted the Treaty of Delft, making Philip her heir and governor. When she died in 1433, Philip could begin integrating Holland, Zeeland, Hainaut, and Brabant into the growing Burgundian Netherlands. While Philip fought Jacqueline, the war between England and France intensified. In 1429, Joan of Arc led French forces to victory at Orleans, giving the demoralized French new hope. Soon after, the Dauphin Charles was crowned King Charles VII at Reims. Though England still held Paris, France now had an officially crowned king. The tide of the 100-Year War had turned. Tensions still grew between England and Burgundy, especially because of their support for Jacqueline. Still, Philip continued to work with England. In 1430, he joined the Siege of Prevenier, where his soldiers captured Joan of Arc and gave her to the English. They burned her on May 30th, 1431. After the Siege of Prevenier, Charles VII tried to break the Anglo-Burgundian alliance for good. A dispute in the nearby Duchy of Lorraine gave him an opening. A battle near Boulogneville in July 1431 led to a quick defeat for the anti-Burgundian side, boosting Philip's confidence in his military and leaving him feeling that England did too little for his defense. In truth, Philip had already begun secret talks with Charles VII. By the end of 1431, Burgundy and France agreed to a long truce that left Philip free of any real duty to England. In 1435, Philip hosted a peace conference in Arras between England, Burgundy, and France. At the conference, France demanded that England drop its claim to the French crown, who then promptly refused and left. Bedford then died in September, and 3 weeks later, Philip made peace with Charles. England lost its strongest ally, and Philip gained both power and prestige. Outside of war, Philip fostered a luxurious court life that made Burgundy famous and desired across all of Europe. Almost every feast, banquet, and wedding overflowed with fresh food, sweet desserts, roaring music, and spectacular live entertainment. The grandest event was the Feast of the Pheasant in 1454. Philip held it in Lille to inspire a crusade against the Ottoman Turks, who had taken Constantinople the year before. Artists created scenes, songs, and symbols, and performers acted beside real lions. Though no crusade came of it, the feast became legendary. People in Burgundy admired jousting more than any other sport. Philip often judged these contests. Some settled real arguments, while others offered fame and honor. Well-known knights such as Pierre de Beaufort and Jacques de Lalande drew countless challengers from faraway lands. Philip valued art and supported many artists, such as jewelers, writers, and clockmakers. His greatest success came through painting. Jan van Eyck, the most famous artist under Philip, joined the court in 1425 with a high salary that allowed him and his brother Hubert to travel Europe and to work freely. Van Eyck painted portraits of clerics, chancellors, merchants, and even Isabella of Portugal, so that Philip could see her likeness before they married in 1430. Van Eyck broke from older Gothic styles by painting realistic details such as wrinkles, hair, and texture. He used bold light, rich colors, and careful oil layers that made his figures look alive. His skill greatly shaped early Renaissance art, and he served Philip until he died in 1441. Philip used the Congress of Arras in 1435 to turn against the English, and he tried to take the vital English port of Calais the next year. Calais had strong walls and flooded fields, while Flemish troops refused to fight. Philip was forced to abandon the siege in July. Afterwards, the English struck back, burning Flemish towns and humiliating Philip. Violent riots then exploded in Bruges and Ghent, resulting in Philip blockading Flanders into submission by early 1438. Philip gained control of the Duchy of Luxembourg in 1443 and bought it outright in 1451. By this point, Philip ruled over so many duchies, counties, and lordships that people began to call him the Grand Duke of the West. Like any self-respecting Grand Duke, Philip created a semi-permanent tax halt in 1447, based on the French gabelle tax. Ghent refused to pay, so Philip declared war in 1452. Ghent's rebels seized Gever and tried to take Oudenarde, firing cannons, fire arrows, and threats into the town, but Philip's troops held on long enough for help to arrive. Philip then destroyed forts near Ghent and beat a force at Rupelmonde. In the summer of 1453, Burgundian forces took key towns surrounding Ghent, such as Schneidelbeck and Poc, before moving on to Gever. On July 23rd, the Ghent rebels met Philip in battle. There, a careless cannoneer let a spark fly into a sack of gunpowder, causing mass panic among the Ghentians. Philip's troops charged and drove many rebels into the river Scheldt, killing around 17,000. Afterwards, Ghent was forced to pay heavy fines, lose privileges, and sovereignty. Although the war harmed Flanders' economy, the rebellion played a crucial role in the formation of a Burgundian identity, as all of Philip's territories united to defeat a common foe for the first time. By the time he had crushed Ghent, Philip was entering his 60s, and his influence was weakening. The powerful House of Qui took control of the court, acquiring top offices and huge wealth. In 1457, Philip's son Charles boldly refused to give Qui a post, despite Philip's wishes, beginning a long quarrel between father and son. Philip was paid to hand over some fortified towns on the Somme River to the new King of France, Louis XI, worsening his relationship with his son. In 1464, Louis sent men to abduct a Breton messenger, believed to be drawing Charles into a growing coalition of nobles against him. Rumors claimed Louis also wanted to seize Charles. As a result, Philip convened an Estates General to raise a new tax across the Burgundian Netherlands for a war against Louis. There, he reconciled with Charles, who pushed the Crees aside. In March 1465, the War of the Public Weal began as the princes of Burgundy, Brittany, Berry, Orléans, Bourbon, and Armagnac united in defense of their rights against Louis. Charles marched on Paris and fought Louis in a bloody battle at Montlhéry in July. Neither side won. But when news came of Pontoise and Rouen falling to rebels, Louis was pressured into granting lands and wealth to his rivals, including the Somme towns, thereby ending the war. While all this happened in France, Liege once again rebelled. In August 1466, Charles besieged Hainaut, captured it, and destroyed much of the town. Charles then forced Liege to accept another harsh peace, though the rebels did not intend to keep it. Philip the Good later died on June 15, 1467, at age 72. Upon hearing the news, the people of Liege celebrated. Charles, the new Duke of Burgundy, made sure they would pay dearly. Part 4. The RASH. In the August of 1467, Liege rebels raided nearby Burgundian lands in Limburg and the town of Weal. Charles had already gathered an army of about 10,000 men, and he marched out in October to crush the revolt. On October 28th, the two sides met at Bruchstem, northwest of Liege. Burgundian horsemen and archers beat the rebel force, pressuring the people of Liege into deciding peace or retreating. By mid-November, Charles entered Liege in triumph. On November 28th, he took away the city's rights, laws, weapons, courts, and walls. He also banned citizens from carrying weapons and ended many old traditions. But Liege still belonged to the Holy Roman Empire and the Church, so Charles could only tighten his control to a certain point. King Louis stayed away at first. Pressure from Charles and the powerful Bourbon family later pushed him to join a campaign against Liege. Their main goal was to rescue Louis de Bourbon, the Prince Bishop of Liege, and take back his lands. The city rose again, but lost another battle at Latin, which spread fear across the city. On October 30th, 1468, Louis and Charles led an attack on Liege. The city offered almost no organized defense. Soldiers looted homes and churches while burning parts of the city. Many legionnaires were killed, while many more fled the brutal sacking. After the destruction, nearby cities such as Cologne, Aachen, and Metz sent gifts or apologies to avoid angering Charles further. Upon becoming Duke of Burgundy, Charles had to deal with high tensions with France. French officials often entered his lands, collecting taxes and recruiting soldiers. Disputes over the Somme towns added to the strain. Charles decided to build a strong alliance to counter France. He turned to England and its king, Edward IV, and in October 1467, he married Edward's sister, Margaret of York, in a grand wedding. Although the marriage revived the Anglo-Burgundian alliance, Charles showed little eagerness to fight France immediately. On October 14, 1468, Louis and Charles agreed to the Treaty of Péronne. Charles promised to pay homage for his French lands, and Louis agreed to pay a debt he owed to his brother-in-law, the Duke of Savoy. The treaty was mostly symbolic. Louis never planned to fully obey it, and Charles did not trust him. By 1470, Louis seized the Somme towns, armed Burgundian traders, and prepared for war. During this time, Edward IV fled to Burgundy, escaping the Wars of the Roses back home. Charles gave him money and ships, and Edward won back his throne in 1471. In 1472, Charles launched a major campaign in France. He crossed the Somme, burned towns, and raided Picardy and Normandy. He attacked Beauvais, but the town held out for 25 days. After this failure, Charles officially declared war and gained support from several great nobles, including Louise's own brother. Even with a large army in support, Charles could not capture key cities or stop French strikes. By November, both sides agreed to a 5-month truce, leading to a tense but stable peace, for now. Charles wanted to follow in his father's footsteps and unite the Burgundian lands into a cohesive, unified state. The lands of the House of Habsburg in the Holy Roman Empire were split between several family members. Duke Sigismund of Austria, who held lands on the Upper Rhine, was under attack from the Swiss. In 1469, he made the Treaty of Saint-Omer with Charles. Sigismund gave Charles control of Alsace in exchange for some money to pay off war debts. Nearby, the duchies of Lorraine and Flanders were key to linking Charles's northern and southern lands. Charles often settled disputes in these lands, sometimes supporting allies, sometimes to keep the peace. In 1473, Charles was given military access by Lorraine's new duke, René II. As for Flanders, Charles bought the reversion to the duchy, which meant that when Duke Arnold died in 1473, Charles took control, albeit with force. Charles's only child and heir, Mary, born in 1457, became a key tool in his political plans. Many rulers across Europe sought her valuable hand, including Ferdinand of Aragon, Nicholas of Lorraine, and the Duke of Clarence, brother of Edward. But Charles kept her for his main plan, to become King of the Romans, the last step before becoming Holy Roman Emperor. In 1473, Charles met Emperor Frederick III in Trier. In exchange for marrying Mary to his son Maximilian, Frederick III verbally agreed to give Charles a kingdom made from his lands in the empire. Rumors of Charles's coronation then spread, but Frederick III quietly left Trier on November 25th before anything could happen. When Duke Sigismund gave Charles control of Alsace, it upset the region. Strasbourg relied on the Rhine trade, and now Burgundian influence threatened it. Bern also felt uneasy, because French-speaking newcomers replaced their old Habsburg rivals. At this time, people used the word Swiss to refer to the 8 cantons of the Eidgenossen, the old Swiss Confederation. These cantons swore an oath to defend each other, but they were also quite expansionist. Charles placed bailiff Peter von Hagenbach in charge of Alsace. Hagenbach ruled with despotic cruelty. He raised taxes, bullied Swiss traders, and bragged that he would soon take over Swiss lands. In response, a broad anti-Burgundian coalition began to form at Constance, with Austria, the Swiss, and the cities of Strasbourg, Basel, Colmar, and Sillestadt. In 1474, the people of Brisach joined the mutiny, and the League of Constance arrested Hagenbach, tried him, and killed him. While this happened, Charles allied Ruprecht, the elector Archbishop of Cologne, but the local estates resisted him. Neuss fought the hardest and chose Hermann of Hesse as its protector. Charles marched to besiege Neuss in 1474 with an impressive army, but the Hessian defenders fiercely held out for nearly a year. Frederick slowly brought up an army, and both sides agreed to a hostile truce in June 1475. Around this time, Edward planned an attack on France to win back Old Glory with Burgundian help. Charles met Edward when he landed in Calais, but quietly broke his commitment. Edward instead met Louis in Picardy in August, accepting a generous pension and a truce. Charles soon made his own peace with Louis, giving him room to act against Lorraine. As mentioned before, Lorraine was key to connecting Charles's northern and southern lands, and it was long under Burgundian influence. But Duke Rene II joined the League of Constance and declared war in May 1475. Charles used this as an excuse to invade. By November 30th, he marched into its capital Nancy in triumph. While Charles fought in Lorraine, Bern and Freiburg invaded Vaud, a region controlled by Burgundy's ally, Savoy. Unlike with Edward, Charles could not ignore this event. In January 1476, he ordered all of his subjects to gather for war, or lose their property, or even their lives. His first target was Granson, a Savoyard town that Bern had seized. Charles stormed the town on February 21st, and forced the garrison in the castle to surrender on the 28th. He then killed most of them, which enraged the Swiss. Bern and his allies marched to help Granson, but arrived too late. On March 2nd, a Swiss army attacked the Burgundian camp, while another struck from the woods. Charles tried to retreat to higher ground, but his men thought he was fleeing and broke apart. The Swiss chased them away and were rewarded by capturing a huge amount of Burgundian treasure. Despite losing, Charles did not lose confidence. He gathered 12,000 fresh troops and besieged Morat in June, the gateway to Bern. The Swiss advanced through the Rhine with a large army of 25,000. On June 22nd, they attacked. The slumbering Burgundians formed up too slowly, were overwhelmed as a result, and lost a third of their men. Burgundy's invincibility was crumbling. After the defeat at Morat, Charles began to lose control of Savoy. Louis moved fast to take it. He placed trusted allies there and freed his sister, Duchess Yolande, who had then cut her ties with Burgundy. To make matters worse, Duke Rene's supporters in Lorraine had taken back their lands. When Charles reached the area in late September, a mutiny had already forced the Burgundian troops in Nancy to give up on October 6th. Charles gathered about 10,000 soldiers, including the garrison from Nancy and fresh troops from the Netherlands. Rene tried to unite his allies, including the Swiss, and he marched them to Nancy by January 1477. On January 5th, the allies struck first. Charles placed his men near streams and woods, but he misjudged their strength. Heavy snow hid the allies as they moved around his lines. They hit Charles's army from the side, and his cavalry broke, while his guns fell to the enemy. Swiss troops then charged straight at his center, and many Burgundians ran or drowned in the icy rivers. The few who fled to Metz after the battle arrived cold, hungry, and wounded. Days later, a search party roamed the battlefield. They saw stripped and dismembered bodies everywhere. Among them lay a frozen corpse, its face mangled, and a deep blow had cracked open its skull. Only recognizing the long nails and battle scars, the soldiers came to the realization that Charles the Bold, the 44-year-old Duke of Burgundy, with no male heir to succeed him, was dead. Part 5. The Rich. Louis heard about Charles's death at Nancy before Charles's own daughter Mary did, and he acted at once. Charles had changed Burgundy's government to strengthen it for war. He created a new Parliament of Mechlin to exact justice and manage finances across the Burgundian Netherlands. And he raised taxes sharply to support a modern, standing army. Many nobles disliked this centralization and defected to France in the wake of Nancy. The lands that Mary now held stood close to open revolt. Mary was only 20, and she walked into disorder in Ghent. She had no soldiers and no money. Crowds rose, attacked her father's officials, and forced her to bring back old rights. Louis, meanwhile, sent troops into Picardy, Artois, Flanders, and Hainaut. He claimed Charles's lands returned to the French crown because Charles had acted against the king, and because Sainte-Claude blocked women from illegally inheriting titles. The duchy and the Free County of Burgundy accepted reunion with France. Picardy and Artois soon followed, and Louis's forces moved toward Hainaut. Tension between Mary's court and the Flemings increased, and Louis stoked this divide. When a letter showed that Mary still listened to advisors who supported Charles's harsh rule, the Estates General executed 2 of them. If something was not done fast, the entire Burgundian inheritance would fall to France. While powerful foreign threats eyed her lands, Mary also faced trouble at home. Many towns in the Burgundian Netherlands feared that she would raise taxes and rule just as strictly as her father. To gain trust, she called the Estates General so they could confirm her as their ruler. The Estates General arrived with many complaints about unfair government actions. Mary needed their support, so she agreed to their demands. In February 1477, she issued the Great Privilege. This document gave the Estates General more control, protected local laws, and limited her power. It forced the ruler to ask for approval before starting a war or raising taxes. If the ruler broke the agreement, the people could refuse to obey their word. The provinces welcomed the Great Privilege and asked for more local rights. They wanted fair trials at home and protection from unfair arrests. To meet these demands and ease pressure from France, Mary's government closed the Parliament of Mechlin and returned autonomy to many areas. Still, unrest grew. From January to April 1477, towns across the Netherlands rose up. Workers armed themselves, took over town halls, and demanded old freedoms. These tensions reached their height when the Estates General executed some of Mary's councillors, as mentioned before. With her legitimacy still shaky and her support base shrinking, Mary offered her hand in marriage to the Archduke Maximilian, the son of Emperor Frederick III, whom Charles had planned to marry his daughter to previously. They married by proxy in April, and then in person on August 19th in Ghent. Maximilian was 18. He possessed a sharp mind, strong energy, and early training in war and politics. Mary and Maximilian's love for each other proved genuine and affectionate, and they had an heir Philip born in 1478, and later a daughter, Margaret, in 1480. Maximilian admired the great wealth of the Netherlands, especially the city of Ghent, but he soon learned that the ducal treasury held no money. The Estates General doubted Maximilian's claims about Burgundy's dire finances. Only after new French raids in 1479 did they agree to fund a real army. Maximilian used it to win the Battle of Gunegate, yet the victory changed little. France kept fighting, Walders stirred trouble, while old feuds flared in Holland. In March 1482, tragedy struck Mary fell from her horse during a hunt and was crushed. Doctors could not save her, as her broken ribs had pierced a lung. She asked her advisors to accept Maximilian as regent for the young Philip, before dying on March 27th at age 25. Thus was the last of the Valois Dukes of Burgundy. Over the course of a century, they transformed a collection of disconnected and unrelated lands into one of Europe's richest and strongest states, feared and admired across the continent. However, with the death of Mary the Rich, these lands were divided among their neighbors, forever shaping the course of European history for centuries. On December 23, 1482, Maximilian signed the Treaty of Arras. His daughter Margaret went to France to marry the Dauphin Charles. As her dowry, France gained the two Burgundies, Picardy and Artois. This loss hurt Maximilian's pride, but it placed Habsburg power right on France's doorstep. In 1487, anger toward Maximilian exploded. He ruled with the same domineering style as Charles, ignoring the Great Pillage and raising taxes to fund his war with France. Ghent's leaders complained about war, trade issues, and abuse by soldiers. When Maximilian entered Bruges in 1488, Guild members trapped him inside a building and shut the city gates. A large imperial army soon marched into Flanders to free the King of the Romans, and support for Ghent collapsed. The rebellion eventually ended in 1492, beginning a new age in the Habsburg Netherlands. Towns like Bruges declined in prosperity, while Antwerp grew because it had better sea access and supported Maximilian. In 1493, the new King of France, Charles VIII, was preparing for war in Italy and did not want the Habsburgs to attack. He and Maximilian signed the Treaty of Senlis in May, where France gave up claims to Artois and the Free County of Burgundy. That same year, Maximilian became Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire after his father died, and handed the Netherlands to his son Philip. In 1496, Philip married Joanna, the daughter of King Ferdinand of Aragon and Queen Isabella of Castile. They had 6 children, though their marriage later suffered. For a short time in 1506, they ruled Spain together. From that point onwards, the Habsburg Netherlands belonged to the kings of Spain. With their lands now surrounding France from all angles, a vicious 2-century rivalry between the kings of France and the Habsburgs of Austria had begun.